Imagine waking up one day as an ancient human and slowly realizing the world around you has quietly started to blur, the edges of trees softening, faces becoming harder to recognize from a distance, and knowing there is no eye doctor, no glasses, no surgery, absolutely nothing available anywhere to fix it. Researchers studying ancient skeletal remains and comparing them with still existing traditional populations have found that vision loss, including complete blindness, happened to ancient humans far earlier in life and far more often than most people today would ever guess. But the real reason behind why it happened so early is not what most people assume, and by the end of this video you will understand exactly what was quietly destroying ancient human eyesight long before old age ever had the chance to. If figuring out the hidden realities of how the human body actually broke down before modern medicine ever existed is the kind of mystery that keeps pulling you in, this is exactly the territory this channel explores every single week. So staying nearby means the next one will not slip past you unnoticed. Let's start with the assumption most people carry into this topic, because it is almost completely wrong. Most people assume ancient humans simply lost their vision the same way people do today, a slow, natural decline tied purely to old age. But researchers examining ancient remains and studying vision loss patterns in traditional societies that still exist today have found that early, severe vision problems were showing up in ancient humans at ages that would be considered shockingly young by modern standards, sometimes affecting people still in the prime of their physical lives. So if it was not simply old age creeping in gradually the way it does for most people today, what was actually happening? The first major factor comes down to something almost nobody thinks about when picturing ancient life: constant, unfiltered exposure to intense sunlight. Ancient humans spent nearly their entire lives outdoors, hunting, gathering, and traveling across open, sunlit landscapes with absolutely no sunglasses, no wide-brimmed hats in many regions, and no consistent shade to retreat into throughout the day. Prolonged, repeated exposure to strong ultraviolet light is directly linked, according to modern vision research, to accelerated damage in the lens and surface of the eye, contributing to cataracts and other vision-clouding conditions far earlier than they would typically develop in someone with regular access to shade and eye protection. In other words, the very environment that kept ancient humans alive, the open plains and sun-drenched landscapes essential for hunting and gathering, was simultaneously working against their eyesight every single day. One accumulated dose of ultraviolet exposure at a time. Here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. If you had to spend every single day of your life outdoors, under direct sunlight with zero eye protection, starting from early childhood, how old do you think you would be before your vision started noticeably struggling? Type your honest guess in the comments below, because the real answer, according to researchers studying this topic, might be younger than you expect. There is a second major factor layered on top of sun exposure, and it involves something researchers have found consistent evidence for across multiple ancient populations: chronic, repeated eye infections. Without any concept of basic hygiene the way we understand it today, without clean water for reliably washing the face and eyes, and in environments filled with dust, smoke from constant open fires, and airborne debris, ancient humans experienced eye infections far more frequently than most people today ever will. A single infection, treated or not, usually resolves without lasting damage. But repeated infections, occurring again and again across an entire lifetime with no antibiotics and no proper treatment available, could gradually cause scarring on the surface of the eye, permanently affecting vision in ways that accumulated slowly and irreversibly over time. Smoke exposure deserves its own moment here, because it is easy to underestimate just how significant this factor actually was. Ancient humans spent enormous amounts of time near open fires, for warmth, for cooking, and for protection from predators through the night. Constant, close-range exposure to smoke is now understood to contribute to chronic eye irritation and inflammation, and over years or decades of near-daily exposure inside small shelters or caves with limited ventilation, This kind of chronic irritation is believed by researchers studying ancient health patterns to have played a meaningful role in gradually deteriorating eye health for a significant portion of the ancient population. There is a third contributing factor worth mentioning here, one tied directly to nutrition rather than environment. Certain nutrients, particularly compounds the body converts into forms essential for maintaining healthy vision, were not always consistently available depending on season, location, and the specific diet a given community relied on. Researchers studying nutritional deficiencies and their effects on eye health have identified a clear link between chronic shortages of these specific nutrients and progressive vision problems, including difficulty seeing in low light. In severe and prolonged cases, permanent damage to the surface of the eye. For ancient communities going through lean seasons with limited access to the specific foods that provide these nutrients, this would have added yet another slow, compounding pressure working against long-term eye health. Stacked directly on top of sun exposure, infection, and smoke damage. None of this means every ancient human went blind young, and this next part matters for understanding the full picture honestly. Vision loss patterns clearly varied significantly based on environment, lifestyle, and even simple luck. Populations living in regions with dense forest cover and more consistent natural shade likely experienced less cumulative ultraviolet damage compared to populations living on open, sun-exposed plains or in bright, reflective snow-covered environments, where sunlight bouncing off snow can be even more damaging to the eyes than direct daylight in other terrains. Communities with more reliable access to clean water sources likely experienced fewer, repeated eye infections compared to communities relying on shared, contaminated water. There was no single universal ancient experience with vision loss, but rather a wide range of outcomes shaped entirely by environment, exposure, and circumstance. If a story this layered is holding your attention right now, that reaction is exactly why leaving a like on a video like this helps more people stumble onto the same kind of surprising history. So if it is doing that for you, this is a good moment to tap it. It is also worth noting that ancient humans were not entirely passive against these threats, even without understanding the underlying biology behind any of them. Archaeological evidence from certain regions, particularly areas with intense reflected sunlight such as snow-covered environments, includes simple protective tools carved from bone, wood, or antler featuring narrow slits designed to be worn directly over the eyes, dramatically reducing the amount of light reaching the eye while still allowing enough vision to navigate safely. This device functioned on the same basic principle modern snow goggles still rely on today, reducing overall light exposure through a narrow opening rather than blocking it entirely. Its existence suggests that at least some ancient communities recognized, likely through repeated painful experience rather than any scientific understanding, that certain environments were actively harmful to their eyes, and took deliberate steps to reduce that harm using whatever materials their environment provided. Here is where the story becomes genuinely remarkable, rather than simply grim, because researchers studying this topic have found real evidence that ancient communities did not simply abandon someone the moment their vision began to fail. Archaeological findings from multiple sites have uncovered skeletal remains of individuals believed to have experienced significant vision impairment, who nonetheless survived for many years afterward, sometimes decades. Well past the point where independent survival through hunting alone would have been possible. This tells researchers something important. Someone in that person's community was actively supporting them, sharing food, providing protection, and allowing them to continue contributing to group life in whatever way their remaining abilities allowed. This points to something researchers describe as one of the clearest signs of genuine social cooperation in ancient human history. A person with significantly impaired vision could not reliably hunt fast-moving prey or navigate unfamiliar terrain alone. Yet evidence shows some of these individuals lived long, sustained lives within their communities. That is not survival through strength or self-sufficiency. That is survival made possible entirely through the willingness of an entire group to carry someone whose physical contribution had been permanently reduced. It also appears that vision-impaired individuals in some ancient communities took on different, adapted roles rather than being pushed entirely out of daily life. Some researchers point to indirect evidence suggesting individuals with reduced eyesight may have taken on tasks relying more heavily on touch, memory, and other senses, such as toolmaking through feel rather than sight, or passing down oral knowledge and stories to younger members of the tribe. This is presented by researchers as a reasonable, evidence-supported possibility rather than a certainty, since direct proof of specific roles from this deep in human history is inherently difficult to establish with full confidence. Sit with that idea for a moment, because it reframes the entire question in an important way that is easy to overlook at first. Ancient human survival was never only about individual physical capability. It also depended on a community's willingness to adapt around a member's limitations, finding new ways for that person to remain valuable and cared for rather than treating declining ability as an automatic reason for exclusion. So here is the real answer to the question this video opened with. Some ancient humans went blind early not primarily because of old age, but because of a combination of relentless, unprotected sun exposure accumulating damage year after year, repeated untreated eye infections in an environment without hygiene or medicine, and constant close-range smoke exposure from the very fires that kept them warm and safe. It was less a single dramatic event and more a slow, cumulative erosion, built from the same environment ancient humans depended on to survive in every other way. And when vision loss did happen, the evidence suggests many of these individuals were not abandoned, but supported and adapted for by communities willing to carry them through it, in whatever way that particular group of ancient humans found possible. If this uncovered something you did not expect, there is another question sitting right behind it that might be even harder to picture clearly. What actually happened inside an ancient human tribe when someone was born different from everyone else around them, and how a group with no concept of modern medicine chose to respond to that difference? That story is coming next, and it reveals something about ancient human compassion that most people have never once considered, something that says far more about who ancient humans were as a species than any tool or weapon ever could.